maka kaina komi moto kona bango
Greetings to you all. I think we seem to have a technical problem. Hussein and Sophie are having problems hearing. David, is there anything you can do before we start? David, are you hearing me?
Yes, we can
David,
hear
are
you.
you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I just told you that Sophie and Hussein are having problems with sound. Is it to do with the quality of the internet edge service or something else? Hello? Hello?
Yes, Prof, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was asking whether this has to do with the quality of this internet today. Sophie and Hussein are having problems hearing. Hello? Have we got all our panelists there? Can you just do a roll call quickly, David? David, we want to make sure that our panelists are all there. Oh my God. A disaster here. Tony, can you hear me? Hello? I hope you can all hear me. We have a bit of technical problem today. Anyway, let me start. We are looking at the very tragic situation in Tanzania today. And this is why we have brought this policy dialogue forward. And I have to at once thank our panelists, Hussein Khalid, Sophie Mkwena, Sishua, and Eleanor Sululu for agreeing to come on board at such short notice. And I'm really sorry that these problems being encountered in terms of the technology before us. But the real reason why we're here today is to, first and foremost, lament the situation in Tanzania, to express our condolences for the hundreds that have been killed in the course of the election in Tanzania. We will be getting statistics, hopefully from Hussein, who is speaking from Nairobi, next door. We hope that we can get more information. We've been in touch with one or the other of our comrades inside Tanzania, but they too, their movements are very restricted and the information is too scanty. But one thing is confirmed, that the deaths are in the hundreds, if not thousands. So, secondly, we want to get to know from people like Hussein and Sophie, who's a journalist, the status of the situation in Tanzania right now, notwithstanding the hurried swearing in of this lady. We really want to know how things stand, in particular the condition of the civilian population in the face of what has happened, unprecedented. And to get to know whether it's true that the Ugandan forces were involved in this carnage. And thirdly, and not least, we want to consider what are the alternatives to these tragic rituals of elections. As someone said, there are lessons to be learned from Tanzania, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, and one might add even Zimbabwe, DRC, and that if you want real change, the ballot is not the way. We need to learn quickly about that. But I think we never expected such tragic expression of this ritual as happened in Tanzania. So we have to really lament, as we do hereby. And I have to ask whether Hussein is ready to help us start. Hussein? Karibu. Carry on. Carry on, you're saying?
Hello.
Yes, I can hear you. Carry on.
Good evening. Hello.
Yes, good evening.
Good evening. I can hardly hear you.
I can hear you. I can hear you. I can hear you. Please carry on. We can hear you. Carry on. Carry on. Khalid, carry on. Khalid, carry on. Carry on, Hussein. 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 Okay, Sishua. Sishua. Please carry on. Can you carry on? Sishua.
Hi, Bob.
Sorry about this. Yeah, carry on. I'm sorry about this.
That's okay. I think that I hope that Hussein can come in because we needed to have a perspective of what really happened in
Yes.
relation to the issue that he had raised. because that provides a basis upon which further discussion in relation to the implications of what has happened in Tanzania for the region and generally speaking for the continent should be understood. And so I will not get into the details of what really happened there. I would hope that my colleague...
You can mention what you have heard so far. Then we'll have Hussein come in later. Yes.
Well, it's difficult. For example, first, I want to start by passing my condolences to our Tanzanian brothers and sisters who have lost their lives. Elections should not be moments where our lives are lost. It should be a moment of celebration, the triumph of choice, in terms of policy appeals, in terms of leadership, in terms of character. But what happened in Tanzania was something unexpected. Tanzania is a country that the region and the continent has looked at for many years as one of the most peaceful countries in the region, on the continent. And so when we saw, the violent protest, the crackdown on protesters, it was very, very surprising. And what is more disturbing, that we don't even know how many people have lost their lives. Depending on who you talk to, some are saying the numbers are negligible. Government officials are even questioning whether anybody has died. But others are saying we are talking about hundreds here, potentially 1,000 lives have been lost. And I think that the lack of information, in a sense, provides an entry point for starting the conversation around the carnage in Tanzania. And that is a question of language. For those of us outside Tanzania, there is very limited information available in the public sphere because, as you know, Tanzania, like much of East Africa, uses Swahili, and we really have limited access to understanding what's happening in Tanzania because of that language barrier. It is something that I would say we share at the regional level with countries like Angola and Mozambique, which are not English-speaking countries. So those of us who are in the English-speaking, part of the region, part of the continent, have difficulties understanding what exactly happened in this country, especially in between elections, but even during moments of deadly protest like what has happened now. And I wonder how, going forward, that challenge can be addressed, because it's very central to creating the kind of awareness that is very important to helping people outside Tanzania to understand what's going on in the country long before a moment like what we saw in the last few days. I wanted to simply highlight a couple of points about what the Tanzanian experience of the last few days and weeks means for the region in terms of the implications. I think I wanted to discuss maybe just three key points for a start. The first point is really to make reference to the election observation reports issued by the Southern African Development Community, SADC, and the African Union, AU. The reports are similar, and I would imagine that many of the people who have tuned into this discussion have familiarized themselves with these the reports. But the key elements of these reports are quite the same. They decry the kind of flawed constitutional framework around which elections in Tanzania are held. When, for example, candidates have lost, there is no recourse to election petitions, like is the case elsewhere in the region, and that I think also contributed to this scenario, because if the election is flawed, then what options are there for those who have lost? If you are really trying to preserve peace, you want to encourage people to go to a court and present evidence of irregularities so that the courts can competently decide on the concerns, the grievances that the losing party has. And the winners can also present evidence in support of the assertion that they have won genuinely. So if we remember, before the election, there was a greater push toward institutional reform by the opposition and civic activists in Tanzania. And those calls fell on deaf ears. What we saw was an election that proceeded. And in the context of the glaring irregularities that have been mentioned in the report, but of the African Union and of SADC, what would have been helpful, if those reforms that the opposition had demanded before the election had been implemented, what would have been helpful for the opposition to go to court as part of contesting the victory of the ruling CCM. But that option is not available. And in a sense, the protests were not so much about the outcome. It was really about the election itself, because it was an illegitimate contest, especially that the incumbent president and her party did everything possible to exclude their rivals. One was in prison, the other was excluded on very dubious grounds. They demanded they should sign a code of conduct. So what you had was candidates who really did not present any threat to the party. The result is what we saw, about 97%. Not even Julius Nyerere, during the time of one-party state, got 97% during the election. So you could clearly see that there's no way the incumbent president would have amassed that kind of support. But then what options are available for these for the losing opposition if they wanted to go to court, when the law, for example, doesn't provide for a court process or more of a petition? And I think that the report by the African Union and SADC is important in highlighting the flawed constitutional framework around which elections are held. And I think the key recommendation there is to say, can we make sure that we see changes in that regard going further into the future? There should be an avenue for aggrieved parties to approach the court with evidence of irregularities and to ask the court to nullify such kind of electoral contests, like we have seen elsewhere in Kenya and in Malawi in recent years. And the reports also make clear that there was literally no political competition here, because the key contestants were excluded. They highlight the abductions, for example, that preceded the election, the arrest of opposition activists and leaders, the restrictions on so many rights, political and civil rights, that are central to the democratic project. And for me, the key issue here is not so much what the reports say. I think that we knew that any genuine election observer would highlight what the AU and SADC have pointed out in these reports. The fundamental point is the fact that this is not new. You see, this kind of strong reports from SADC, this kind of strong reports from the AU, yes, they are welcome. And then after they have been issued, what happens? Very little has happened. That's largely because we often focus on the moment of dispute, moment of protest, like what happened in Tanzania, for example, was not something entirely unexpected. If you look at the pre-election conditions that prevailed in Tanzania since the last election under this president, for example, it was to be expected that any election would produce the kind of outcome that has happened. The scale of violence may have been unprecedented, of course, but there was no election that was taking place there. The fundamental point here is that rather than focusing on these moments of violence, for example, going forward, as SADC and as the AU, it's very important to really focus on what happens before the election, between the election, because when you talk to Tanzanian civil society, Tanzanian academics, they were pointing out some of these things. Even the opposition parties, they were pointing out that the environment is not conducive for elections because there has been no institutional reform, because the ruling party is operating effectively like a one-party system. But nobody listened. And when the observers come from outside, from the rest of the continent, a couple of days before the election, they produce the kind of reports that capture the moment in terms of the protests, in terms of the killings, in terms of the crackdown that we witnessed. But that was a consequence of a much longer historical process that I think we tend to miss, because we focus on the moment rather than the process that led to that moment. So the key things for me, I think that the SADC and the AU have to do going forward is no longer simply to focus on the moment of dispute. It's really to say, what do we do between the elections to make sure that we create an environment in which the election is simply the product of a much longer historical process that has been created to produce a conducive environment in which free and fair elections can be held as the SADC and the AU principles. That's one point. I think that it's really important to move away from focusing on the moment, to trace the process of how we get here, because what has happened in Tanzania was always going to happen if the conditions that existed in Tanzania didn't change before the election. The second point is really the question of, what does this do for the region in terms of, the kind of outcome that has been witnessed. Yes, leaders stayed away. There was no one from the region in terms of the highest level of leadership. We didn't see Kagame there. I don't even think Paul Kagame congratulated his Tanzanian counterpart in terms of the election results. The only person who popped up there was the Zambian president, Hakainde Hichilema, who claimed that he was there for to advance national interest. That was not true. You see, he claimed that if he didn't go there, maybe Zambia's relations with Tanzania could have been affected in terms of the economic relations. I don't think so. Many of the countries that neighbor Tanzania use the same port, but they stayed away. Even Museveni, who has never pretended that he runs a democracy, didn't go there to take part in the coronation. So I think that was a very moment of embarrassment for Hichilema, whom many outside Zambia at least tend to see as a Democrat, however false that option may be. The critical issue for me is that if nothing happens after what happened in Tanzania, then Zambia will be next, because the next elections are there. Hichilema has seen that I went to Tanzania, there was a flawed election there. I participated in legitimizing that election by walking on dead bodies to speak about how wonderful that day was for Tanzanians, which is an insult, I think, on our brothers and sisters who have died and who have struggled to get there. But the danger is that we saw what happened in Zimbabwe in the last election, for example. SADC produced a very strong report, and then what happens? Nothing. Then we are seeing what has happened in Tanzania. SADC and the AU have produced a very, very strong report. If nothing happens, that creates a culture of impunity where leaders begin to think, you didn't do anything to Mnangagwa when he stole an election in Zimbabwe. You didn't do anything to the Madam Dictator in Tanzania when she stole an election. Why should you do anything to Hichilema when he is stealing the election? The conditions that prevailed in Tanzania in the run-up to the election are already happening in Zambia in terms of the process that produced the outcome we saw, which is the arrest of opposition, the restriction on civil and political rights, for example, the destruction of opposition voices and leaders and their parties. It is inevitable that if that process is not, stopped, the Tanzanian experience may be replicated in Osaka next year. What can SADC do? What will the AU do? Nothing. They need to create a point where it says, how do we stop this from recurring, so that we don't just produce these quality reports that speak very strongly about the flawness of the election. We have to really invest in preventing that, because if a coup happens in Madagascar tomorrow, we can condemn Madagascar and say let's suspend Madagascar from SADC. But we should also think about the poor governance that produced the outcome that has led to that coup that we are condemning. Because if we simply focus on the outcome rather than the process that drives that outcome, we miss the point. And I think that's very central. The other point, I think, is that we tend to think of Tanzania in terms of the legacy of Julius Nyerere, to say, this was the country of Julius Nyerere. I think that what has happened here after this election is that Nyerere, story is really up in flames. But the key point, I think, that is even missing in much of the discussion is the fact that Tanzania, in my view, was never really a democracy. When you think about how Tanzania transitions from one-party rule to democracy, I think in the early 1990s, I think the moment was 1995, it's much similar to what happens in Zimbabwe, in the sense that you didn't have Democrats. So liberation movements recognized that the tide was changing. It no longer was in fashion to be one-party states, for example, because you would risk opposition from so many voices. So what we saw were authoritarian regimes transforming themselves into democrats, at least rhetorically, not in terms of institutional reform. Apart from South Africa and, say, Namibia, there was very little in the way of dismantling the very architecture of authoritarian state that preceded the introduction of multi-party democracy in many parts of the region. And in Tanzania, the transition to multi-party democracy happened because the leaders in question felt that there was no competition, for example, so we are much safer. And that was the case even in Zimbabwe. When political competition emerged in the case of Zimbabwe, I think after the MDC was formed, but in the case of Tanzania, you could actually say, look at the 2015 elections, you could clearly see that the CCM was in trouble, and that's why we saw that crackdown and the repression in the 2020 election. So whenever there is this risk of competition, ruling parties in the region have basically resorted to the default mode, which is the authoritarian style. But we often mistake that for a new direction. The key point is that there was never a moment when you can say in Tanzania or even in Zimbabwe it was a golden age for democracy to which we could return. And that really legitimizes or validates this push for institutional reform on the part of civil society and opposition parties in both Tanzania and in Zimbabwe, because in the absence of that, it's just a question of when rather than if the next bloodbath is going to occur in the region, as we have just seen in Tanzania. So I think I should stop here for now to give a chance to.
Yeah, before you go, just one number of questions there. First of all, the first question, of course, is what are the conditions for free, fair, and credible elections? That's the first question we have to ask. And I think that, and secondly, aren't you begging the question to say, to state that the conditions for the free and fair elections were never present in Tanzania? We know were they present in Zimbabwe. We, on this program, ran 10 months of kind of a means test, one might say, to determine whether the elections would be free, fair, and credible. And the response was very clear. There were no electoral reforms in Zimbabwe at all, and the elections were likely to be as they turned out. But significantly, the opposition itself threw caution to the wind. They didn't care. And I want to talk about this, the role of oppositions in our region. In 2013, I was at the SADC summit, where the SADC heads of state warned the MDC leadership, Changirai, BT, Washburn, Lube. They were told at the Radisson Hotel, if you go into elections in the next month, those elections will be a disaster. And they still went into the elections. And the result was, as we know, a rigged election. So it appears to me that the kind of compulsive commitment to the ritual of elections is so overwhelming that people go through the ritual all the same. As you say, I mean, in Tanzania, clearly, the opposition leader was jailed a month before. And cynically, they said his case will be heard after the election. That should have enough basis for the opposition to call off the election, not to participate at all. What did we expect? So we have a situation where people have been killed aimlessly, in my view. So how do we, Sishua, how do we create a situation in which, even before the elections, the conditions the electoral playfield is even, enough to give citizens the confidence to go to the ballot? How do we do that?
Well, I think it's by focusing on this thing I'm calling the process rather than the outcome of the moment. You see, let's take the example of Tanzania, for example. The conditions for a free and fair election never existed in Tanzania. The opposition in Tanzania and the civil society and even academics consistently pointed out the absence of those conditions. What are those conditions? You need an independent electoral management body, which can conduct elections in an impartial and non-partisan way, and whose officials are appointed by an independent board rather than a contestant like the president. And what I've seen in Tanzania is really a compromised electoral management body that is far from impartial. You need to put in place such a body, but that is where institutional reforms that the opposition and civil society were demanding before the election comes in. We didn't have that. Then you need to have the space for the opposition, political opposition, to operate, rather than this obstruction of the opposition. Of course, the opposition do have their weaknesses. They have a weak party machinery, they have scarce resources. And many of the opposition parties in Tanzania, like in part of the region, maybe except South Africa, are lacking in terms of institutionalization. But the difficulties that opposition parties face are created by the state, the ruling party, abusing state institutions to obstruct their opponents. Again, the decision to throw Lissu in prison, for example, on a treason charge, is not unique to Tanzania. We saw that in Zambia. Edgar Lungu threw Hakainde Hichilema in prison, in detention, in April 2017 over a treason charge, which was never a treason charge under an imagination. And the key issue here is, unlike in the case of Tanzania, Zambia at least has a constitutional framework where you could say there existed an independent electoral commission. Yes, the independence is relative, but you couldn't say the same about Tanzania. And also, even in the case of Zambia, you had the recourse to court if you lost the election. Hichilema exercised that option in 2016 when he lost the election. He filed a petition in court, and the court process was a sham. But he exercised that option, and I think that sometimes the court itself was new, so there was a building moment.
Yes.
If you get conditions for free and fair elections, you have to look at the constitutional framework, as the AU report has stipulated, which is to say, do we have a constitutional framework, A, that protects the rights of opposition parties to exist, and B, that provides for very peaceful and legal avenues of contesting the results in case of glaring irregularities like this. The conditions for free and fair elections are actually to be seen in the report of the AU in terms of what was lacking. It's just not a constitutional framework, a lack of independent electoral commission. You could also talk about access to the media. Opposition parties need to sell their message.
Yeah, I think sure, all those rules are there. The SADC rules on elections are there, and I think there is a similar set of rules for the AU. They exist, but they are abrogated in almost every election by the ruling parties. I'll come back to you. Let me move to Hussein now. I'll come back to you on this, because we need to get when we come to the end of towards the end of the session, is to discuss what's the way forward. How can we formalize these rules more rigidly to the point where we can say that the election should not be held even before the election itself. So it cannot be held because of these conditions. Hussein?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Karibu.
Yeah.
I can hear you. I can hear you. Carry on. We'd like to hear from you.
Yes.
Hussein.
So for us,
I would like to hear from you the situation in Tanzania right now. We want to know how many were killed.
okay.
What? Yeah, carry on, please.
Thank you. So I believe the situation in Tanzania is not very good. In Nairobi currently. I was in Tanzania a few months ago, but I wasn't allowed to go in. I was stopped at the airport together with Dr. Willy Mutunga, the former Chief Justice, and another activist, Hanifa, and we were turned back. We were deported from Tanzania. Since then, I've not been to Tanzania, but that really got our attention. And we've been mobilizing since to just make sure that the elections were free and fair, that democracy thrives, and that human rights are promoted and protected. So we have networks in Tanzania that were operating even before the elections, just to make sure that, we support our brothers and sisters in Tanzania as they strive to achieve, democracy in their country. And the information that we have is from these networks, is from these partners who are operating there. But obviously, we cannot be very open in sharing who they are because of the security situation in that country. As it stands presently, we understand that the human rights activists, human rights defenders, and also opposition political parties are being hunted down by the government. They have to lie very low. As we speak, we have been trying to document as much as we can so that we can get credible evidence to use it, not just in the Tanzanian courts, but also at the East African level and also at the international level. And the information coming in is not good at all. To begin with, the search for bodies continues. We have information that points to deliberate attempts to try and hide the true figures of persons who were killed. We also have information that in several key locations, government officers have been going for CCTV cameras that were strategically positioned at that point in time. We believe all this is for purposes of hiding the atrocities that were committed by security forces during those 3 or 4 days. The other information is very open. Of course, the internet shut down. The fact that television stations were not allowed to show what was happening in the country. They were forced to resume normal programming, despite the fact that the country was in dire need of information. We have been following up also on the number of deaths. So the figures are disputed, but we estimate the number to be between 3,000 to 5,000. Those are the figures that we are getting from Tanzania. This is both from the Chadema party, from civil society organizations and others. But what is clear is that we may not get to know the true extent of these killings because as it stands presently, bodies are not being found. As Vocal Africa, we are specifically following up on one case of a Kenyan who was a teacher and who had lived in Dar es Salaam for 10 years until he met his death on 29th of October. He was a teacher at one of the schools in Dar es Salaam. And on that day, he was actually proceeding to offer tuition classes, as you might know, to make an extra coin here and there. And on his way to offer the tuition classes, unfortunately, he came across the security forces and he was shot. From the videos that we have seen, he was shot twice from the back. According to his colleagues, is that the body was taken to Mwananyamala. And from what they were told is that there were many bodies on that day. including his, that were taken there. But once the chaos subsided, when they went to that particular hospital to follow up on this colleague, they were told the body is not there. And the only thing they were shown were 2 bodies, which now the authorities claimed that from the fracas, only 2 bodies were taken there. This clearly shows, the change of statements, the change of numbers and figures that is being played out in Tanzania. So as we speak right now, we don't know where this body is. We've tried to communicate to our networks, our partners. We've even communicated to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Kenya to follow up with the Kenyan embassy in Tanzania, in Dar es Salaam, to help locate that particular body. But up to now, we've not been able to do that. As I said earlier, even before the elections, the atrocities that were being committed, including extrajudicial killings and forced disappearances, were very open for everyone to see. I think one good example is of Salaam was actually ejected from a public bus. He went missing for a couple of days, I believe 3 days, only for his body to be found at the seashore. Having been, from the post-mortem, from the autopsy that was done on the body, it was confirmed that he was severely tortured, and his face was actually doused with acid. So these are the kind of atrocities. He was 69 years old. Even someone starts wondering, a 69 years old person, why would they, make them meet their death in such a horrific manner? So these are the kinds of incidences that we have been documenting from Tanzania. And it's really sad, because this is one country that we were all looking up to, from the way they speak, the polite nature of how Tanzanians are, how peaceful they are. The fact that they have been pushed to this level is a clear indication that what is considered to be normal. For a peaceful community, a peaceful country like Tanzania, to witness what we have witnessed in the last 1 week or so, it can only mean that they have been pushed to the wall, And as a East African community, as Africans, it is incumbent upon us to stand in solidarity with the people of Tanzania as they try to not just enhance democracy in their country, but to ensure that human rights, as enshrined in the Constitution of Tanzania, are guaranteed. So this is what we have seen concern. As we speak, we have colleagues, we have friends from Tanzania who are presently in Kenya, running away from the persecution because of what is happening in their country. And the only thing we can do is to offer refuge to these individuals so that, we can stand in solidarity. But yes, from where we stand, the situation in Tanzania is not good. And we are hoping and praying that, this struggle ends positively with the people at the end of the day getting their way.
Hussein, what went wrong in Tanzania? Some of us lived there. I lived there in the late 70s. It's my second home, and many of us in Zimbabwe, Tanzania, South Africa, Namibia, Mozambique. It's our home, the cradle of the struggle. What went wrong?
Yes, that's the $1 million question. I think for many of us, even when we were in law school, we knew that Tanzania, during the days of Mwalimu Nyerere, and even after Nyerere passed on, that was where everyone ran to seek refuge. One of our board members, Professor Alamin Mazrui, when he was being persecuted and trying to run away from the country, he sought refuge in Tanzania. We all know University of Dar es Salaam, very eminent and prominent persons, Willy Mutunga and others. That is where they schooled. Tanzania was the home of African freedom fighters, people who are, trying to enhance democracy in their countries. They knew that in Dar es Salaam, they have a friend. In Tanzania, they have a home where they can, set their base, get to network and with others, and, go back to their countries to ensure that democracy is achieved. So it's $1 million question. And I believe this started from the previous president. I think Magufuli, when he came in, and some of the measures that were taken at that point in time. And, in African culture, we don't speak ill of those who've passed on. But I believe things got very much worse during that period. Because I know, for instance, there were remarks that were made such like, you can be a government officer and then you announce an opposition person as a winner of an election. And when Mama Samia came in, we actually initially thought that, this is the kind of a leader that we want, because he appeared to be loosening the grip. We even saw Mheshimiwa Tundu Lissu getting back from exile. They had a meeting, they had a discussion. So I think that somewhere in between, the party, the CCM as a party, felt scared and thought that they should have a firm grip on the power in Tanzania, and I think that's where things started going wrong. We didn't see the nation moving forward in terms of opening up their airwaves and making sure that everyone is free to contribute to democracy, to contribute to politics in the country. And they continued on that particular trajectory for a couple of months. And when elections came up, it was a bit too late. You can't have an electoral system, that clearly favors the ruling party. So when finally Chadema announced that they will stick to the no reforms, no elections, I believe for the CCM party, they felt that they were being arm twisted. But if you look at the playing field, it is absolutely not level. And because of that, and of course, right now, everywhere in the world, however you look at things, the information sharing through phones, through social media is so powerful that you can't keep a people down. So with the generation Gen Zs now knowing what is happening in the country, information being easily accessible just at the tap of your phone, you can, get the truth. You can actually Google. So you can no longer, drive a certain propaganda without people questioning what is happening. And with that now, we saw now the uprising, people coming out and saying, no, we can't allow this to continue as is. So it's a mix of not just the political system in the country, but also the technological, I would say, opening up of airwaves, then combining those two together. Same for Kenya, same for Nepal, same for Bangladesh, that then becomes an issue that every country has to deal with.
Just two questions before I turn to Sophie and then come back to you later. There is an allegation that Samia is just a front for bigger people behind her. How true is that? That there are powers behind Samia? She has not been.
Okay.
A figurehead from
I think, I think there's some truth in that. Definitely, there's some truth in that. I think the powers of the day are CCM as a party. There are people who, quote unquote, own the party, and they are probably driving that agenda of ensuring power belongs to them and them only. But you see, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who they are. When you're the president, the buck stops at you. Yes, I think when you ask who are they, from what we understand, they are former presidents. There are people who are are known in Tanzania to be the economic tycoons in that country. They're the ones who are reaping from the economy. You know, I may not be in a position to name names exactly, but what we understand is that these are the people who are driving not just the economy, but also the political scene, you know, in Chama cha Mapinduzi. And individuals like Samia, persons who have allowed themselves to be used by these people to sell that agenda. And you see, when you're the president, then it means you will take the fall at the end of the day. These
No doubt about that.
people can then look back and say, look, we were not involved, and they can run away from ICC. They can run away from court cases. But when you're the president, and this is the message that we need to send to Samia and other who might be in similar positions, is that we will hold you accountable because the buck stops at you.
I agree entirely. My last question before I move on to Sophie. What we have heard reports from inside Tanzania, from credible sources, about the involvement of Ugandan soldiers. Can you say something about that? Because you have made no mention of them at all.
Yes, I believe Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania have been working together. I remember when we had this incident at the Tanzania International Airport in Dar es Salaam, we could tell that the governments are talking. You know, our colleagues Boniface Mwangi and Agatha Atuahire, when they were abducted, again, the two countries, Kenya and Uganda, moved extremely slowly, you know, to the extent of saying we can't act if we've not received a complaint, which is, to me, absurd because it's public information. It's all over out there. The only thing you need to do is to communicate to your high commission to act on the complaint. But then you say you were not doing anything because no one has come to the ministry to officially complain, you know? And even in Kenya, during the Gen Z uprising, there were allegations of Ugandan officers involved in some of the shootings, in some of the killings, to the extent where we got like specific pictures that people took and they were able to track back to Uganda as officers in Uganda. When the killings were happening, yeah, so they were saying that they were speaking a different language and they suspected that that was Ugandan language. So I would very much, give credence to claims of Ugandan forces in Tanzania. Unfortunately, the Ugandan forces have been used not just in Tanzania, but in Kenya also. And it's about time as a people. This is why in Kenya, there is a lot of support for the Tanzanian movement in Kenya, because we know that these leaders are working together. And if we want to overcome what is happening in our region right now, as a people, we must also work together. That is why we are standing together with Tanzania, and we will continue pushing and supporting our brothers and sisters in Tanzania to make sure, they are able to achieve their goals and objectives of democracy and human rights in their country.
Yeah, I'll be coming back to you later, but especially on the figures that you gave us, 3,000 to 5,000.
Okay.
And something has to be done about this. Then we move Sophie.
Yeah.
Sophie, I'll be back. I will come back to you, Hussein.
Yes, Prof.
Welcome. Sorry about today. Sorry also for harassing you. Sorry for regimenting you. What are your observations from Joburg on what has been happening in Tanzania?
Well, I think in Tanzania, the problem is the governing party, like all other countries in the SADC region and perhaps on the continent, where you are in a situation where they are losing grip of power and influence. and that emanates from failure to deliver, but secondly, internal squabbles as they see things differently. Now, in some other countries, those liberation organizations, you see those tensions playing themselves out. You can see, for example, in South Africa, you saw the divisions with the ANC. You read about it, you know about it, and they try to hide, but you still get information, the state of the organization. So I think in Chama Penduza, something is happening within the party, and they are pulling in different directions. And now the issue here is, as you pointed out, perhaps they never anticipated that at some point in time we'll have a different continent where people see things differently, where there are resources to communicate. When people are not happy, they will speak out, or they will decide to challenge power in terms of contestation. Because the issue of Tanzania, you'd recall the previous elections for Makafule to win elections at some point in time. The contest was very, very tough. I was there, I covered the elections there. Now, I think that's where the problem is, how a liberation organization adapt and change in terms of the times we live in, and the generation now and expectations now. You can't be an old liberation organization. You have to adapt to meet the current challenges, or position yourself in terms of what's happening now, because people can see, people can travel, people can compare. And therefore, that's where the problem is. Now, coming to the current president, as we know that it was by default after the death of Makafule, and whether she was ready really politically to be a leader who's going to take the party and the country in a particular direction at a particular time, I don't think so. And therefore, that's where the issue is. And therefore, you'll have people within the party who will be influential behind the scenes, who might want her to take a particular direction, others would want her to take a particular direction. So there are forces. She is not on her own. And then now, if you go to elections without looking at the electoral system, where it has got challenges, you will always have a problem. And I think the opposition saying we are not going to elections without electoral reform, they knew it was not going to work. And therefore, that electoral reform, it has to be a nation and political system and leaders who accept that you have to change a political electoral system, because you live in a different time. But of course, the liberation organization will always resist certain changes. And therefore, I think that's where the problem is. When for everybody to agree to have a particular electoral reform or reforms, so that everybody is happy. But the crux of the matter, it's all about so many years, you still have people who are struggling, and people become disgruntled. If these liberation organizations can deliver, stop being corrupt, do things right, people will return them into power, because what ordinary people want is better life, better governance, no corruption, know that they will get help. Their children will go to school. Their children, when they are educated, they'll be able to find jobs. They don't have to cross the Mediterranean and perish there. So there's one formula to whoever is listening from the liberation organizations: deliver, do the things right. You'll be returned to power. You will return to power. I think that's my simple analysis and way forward. But secondly, I really feel Mesulu Hassan, there's something happening. Unlike Namibia, this is a veteran woman who was in exile, who was exposed to real leadership, who was nurtured and a former foreign affairs minister who was exposed to international balance of forces, and you know, and then now he becomes a president. Many people know him, and she's able to accept that something is not going right, and that is why the president of Namibia has been able to reach out to the opposition to try and not agree on everything, but you know, to have that understanding that at the end of the day, it's about the people of Namibia. And if she can keep to that track, even moving quickly, when she heard that there was corruption to fire people, I think the next election, people might return her to power. Of course, age, it's not on her side. But what I'm saying is just do things right. The ANC lost the majority because of what they did. ANC, if you want that majority, do the right things, introspect, and don't. Corruption is the cancer that has killed Africans. Thank
What
you.
is the ANC saying now about the Tanzanian situation? I saw the statement from the ANC.
We saw the statement of the first Deputy Secretary General being upfront that they couldn't really observe. So she has no say because they were not allowed to move around. There was no communication. It's diplomatic language to say something went horribly wrong. SADC did the same, and now the AU. And therefore, really, the current leader will have to reach out and seek advice in terms of how she can move forward, or how do you start from scratch to ensure that you correct the wrongs. Thank you.
No, but what do you think will happen in terms of the first and foremost,
I think behind
the
the
club,
scenes,
the club of
I think
liberation movements?
I think
What
by
is
now she's reaching out to senior politicians in the liberation organizations and those who are in government to say, help me out. I'm sure those discussions are happening. Maybe in a week's time, I'll speak to my people and the contacts, and I think I'll have better information, but I don't think she's resting. I'm sure she's trying to because she's in trouble. After SADC report and the AU report.
Sophie, we've had the responses, the usual responses. Shua spoke about HH having gone for the inauguration. But Shua, you must note that in Zimbabwe, were the first to congratulate this lady and the AU chairman. Right? And we have 3,000 to 5,000 people killed.
Let's leave individuals. Let's look
No,
at the
no. Why not? Why not?
No, I'm
Why
saying,
should we leave individuals?
Yes, because
they represent
individuals,
countries.
Are not, look, Prof, individuals are not homogeneous, and the individuals can't be stronger than the majority. When the AU report, it speaks to many people and countries. It has to be adopted. SADC, it's the same. An individual or a particular country can have its own position. Let's take, for example, Zambia. What Hichilema did, it's because he's scared he's going to elections next year and he's got challenges and he doesn't want to leave. He wants the second term, so he's going to fumble like he did. And therefore, I'm just saying, for the first time, you have SADC and AU saying these elections were not free and fair. It is for the first time. It is for the first time.
Yeah, but the woman has been inaugurated, right?
Prof, a person can be inaugurated. It has happened now, and there's no use for us to cry about it has happened. The question is, as they pointed out, something must happen. People must go and engage that we have to do something to correct this. How they do it, I don't know. Whether
what do you think?
What do
you think should be done in the circumstances that we have? With the AU report, the SADC report, the reports coming from yourselves as journalists.
They must meet and take a decision. And those decisions must be implemented if they really want to defend democracy on the continent and in the region.
Well,
otherwise,
I don't know about that.
The people who are contesting, you don't have a military. There's no way you can say, no, we'll go and and invade Tanzania. And
Sophie, 2 years ago, we had a Zimbabwe election. SADC report was a negative report on the elections. What happened? Come on. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to Eleanor, and then I'll come back to you to the end. We want to end with some recommendations, resolutions that can be conveyed to the AU, to SADC from this platform. Sophie, so prepare one, Sophie. I'll move to Eleanor. Eleanor?
Yes, thank you. And it's a very heavy conversation and very difficult to speak on this. I want to start with deepest condolences to the Tanzanian people, to those who have lost. I was under the impression that about 1,000 lives had been lost, and to hear that it may be 5 times as much is really heartbreaking and painful. So deepest condolences. And for many of us, especially my generation, Tanzania has a special place in our hearts. My personal experience, my first visit to Tanzania was on a mission, an ILO mission to Dakawa and Mazimbu, where I experienced firsthand the hospitality and the support of the Tanzanian people. The emotion with which people were then in Dakawa and Mazimbu spoke of how they were received and treated by both the government and the people of Tanzania was very deep. And so it's a very painful thing. I want to say that Tanzania also supported, Tanzanian civil society hosted an African civil society summit on Zimbabwe. I think it was the 2005 elections, or was it 2000? I'm not sure, but I remember the late Wilfred Manda and Justina Mokoko were part of that delegation, myself and some other crisis in Zimbabwe leaders. And that summit, I will never forget the support and the solidarity from the Tanzanian civil society. And I wish that we could reciprocate in kind. And so, I don't want to go into the things that have happened. I think they've been described by Hussein, Sophie. But I want to say, I've been sitting here thinking, what should we do? What should we as civil society be doing? What should we be demanding? And I really think that there should be a campaign not to recognize this government. We should be pressuring our governments and demanding answers to say, why are you recognizing this government? Also, the issue of elections and preconditions for elections. This SADC campaign these election observer missions are very expensive. I was looking at the SADC report. It was 80 people in total, 66 observers, 13 secretariat staff. That's very expensive. And they went there and they were not allowed to observe in the way they should have. They violated the SADC conditions on elections by not allowing the observers proper access, interrogating them at one stage, taking away their passport, deleting photographs. And so to incur that kind of expense and to get treated like that. So we should campaign that the preconditions, the pre-election period is even more important than the election itself. And if the preconditions are not met, then observers shouldn't go. The SADC Parliamentary Forum used to be the most professional observer mission, which would go 6 weeks before elections, make a report on the pre-election, make report on the election period and the post-election period. What happened to the SADC Parliamentary Forum after the 2008 Zimbabwean elections? SADC itself actually turned on its own parliamentary forum, and if I recall correctly, didn't recognize its report. I would contest Sophie's assertion that this is the first time the AU and SADC have not, or have said an election is not free and fair. It's not the first time. It was done in the case of the Zimbabwean election. I think the 2008 harmonized election. And that set the stage, actually, the precedent for this kind of violation. And as pointed out, it has happened all over Africa. If the Zimbabweans could get away with it, then why not the next person? And I think the people most guilty are the former liberation movements. And I think that this club has to be contested because of the way they support each other. I think that, you know, I've been looking at why is it that we can't respond, maybe in the way that there was not, the civil society responded to the Zimbabwean election at that time. There was a lot of support and there was a lot of mobilization and organization. And I think part of why this has been possible is that we are so overwhelmed. We are like a village in which every single house is on fire. So it's very hard to go to the rescue of someone else when your own house is on fire. We are all dealing with massive problems of corruption in our various countries, of people seeking third terms, governments that will burn down organizations' offices just to prevent them from having a press conference, the global right wing that's mobilizing. So we're confronted with all these things, and it makes it difficult for us to respond. But really and truly, we have to somehow find a way of expressing solidarity. There's a G20 summit, and maybe one of the things is to demonstrate against this lady at the summit, and to petition the South African government not to let her in. Not that they will listen to us, but I think it's worthwhile making a statement to say you cannot be allowed to do this, and give her the kind of reception that Donald Trump received in Scotland. Put the sins right out in her face. I think this, we just have to do something, and we have to look at our capacity to respond. And I think importantly, our capacity to enable young people to be mobilized into a Pan-African solidarity movement. I've been in recent discussions where young people have expressed the fact that they really don't have the opportunity and the exposure that we of the liberation movement generation had to move around and to form solidarity and the networks, the kind of networks that we have today. And I think we need to find a way to facilitate, because those are the young people that go out into the streets. Those are the young people that protest. And those, I'm sure if one did an analysis of this, the people who have been killed in Tanzania, one would find that they're overwhelmingly young people. So, these are things we have to look at. And I don't know, it's difficult now because you can't even contact institutions and say, University of Dar es Salaam, this is what happened to them, because of the level of repression that's happening. But we do have to look for ways. And I think for me, it's like, I know this has happened, Ivory Coast, Cameroon, but I think Tanzania is a special case. We never expected it. And in hindsight, there's no reason why we shouldn't have expected it, but it has happened and we have to deal with it. And we have to find, I think, new ways of organizing, and we have to operate continentally, because these leaders also operate as a club. We have to find ways. I mean, we say AU is useless, SADC is useless, but the thing is, the African Charter, the rules around governing an election, those things are not useless. Those things are good. So it's a thing of holding them to their word, and we have to try and find ways to do this. So I would really recommend a follow-up whereby there are engagements, and they needn't be public engagements, but engagements with civil society organizations, the human rights establishment, to say, you know, how can we take this further so that there is a Pan-African response? I was impressed by the Africa Frontline blog. I think there's I really Ezekiel Enegeta from Nigeria. It was an excellent blog, and I think we need to find ways of getting the word out. I also am not sure of the coverage in South Africa, that there was adequate coverage. I know Africa, the Africa channel, Peter Ndoro, did do some interviews, but I don't think there's been enough coverage on South African media. It's been overwhelmed by global events. So I really think that there needs to be further engagement and a real search for a substantive solidarity response to this. And so I'm not sure. I just feel my immediate thing is to campaign for non-recognition of this government. And then I just want to end, if I can, Ibo, can I end with Pitiga Ntuli's poem as an expression of condolence? I'm just going to read part of it that Pitiga Ntuli, the South African sculptor and poet, wrote in response to what happened. And I'll just read the last part of his poem. The Constitution sealed its own lips. Courts were commanded not to see. The hand that appointed the referees also scored the goals. Freedom flickered, a candle under iron breath. Observers interrogated, cameras erased, even light deemed subversive. Women stood outside the circle of decision. Youth watched from behind the fence of patriarchy. Voters came, looked at the paper, and saw their futility printed there. The people remember. Still, memory votes in secret. It crosses borders unseen. It carries Tundulisu's voice in whisper form and Luhaga Mpina's defiance in dream. The people's neurons remember justice. Each heartbeat is a protest without permit. When law imprisons truth, truth escapes through the rhythm of the drum. Even when the internet is cut, its ancestral signal continues to transmit. Elections and remembrance does not. Fear may win the moment, but not the memory. May Tanzania hear her own heartbeat again. May Africa remember that silence is not peace. May the next wind that rises carry ballots of courage and voices unafraid to speak.
I will share it on the platform. The one you sent me this afternoon. It's very poignant. It's really. But before you go, I'm beginning to conclude this session. Don't you think that it's time for Amnesty International and ICC to get involved?
Well, I'm sure they have said, yes, I'm sure they've said something. I've not followed that up. But I think that the engagement of Human Rights Watch, Amnesty, Electoral Institute of Southern Africa, I don't know if it's still active. I think all these bodies we need some kind of colloquium on this. But there's one constituency which I think is very important, we shouldn't neglect in terms of making protest. That you have had this woman president who, though she wasn't elected, people gave her, she, as one activist put it, camouflaged herself under a gender cloak. And I think feminist organizations need to speak specifically to her on this, that for a woman president to be such a violator of rights and to oversee a massacre of people to that extent is something truly shocking. And I think that we have been talking a lot about gender-based violence in South Africa. And I think that, personally, I will put out to the network in the gender and the feminist networks to say, people, let us say something. Let us say something about this as feminists, as women, that this is really not acceptable. And maybe that can be part of our appeal to say to this government, don't let this lady come into the country. Even if they don't listen to us, at least we will have said something. And we just owe it to the Tanzanian people.
Thanks, Eleanor. Thanks very much for participating here. Khalid, you were saying, my question, are there any plans to get Amnesty International and ICC involved, given this carnage in Tanzania? You are right next door and you are involved in these legal processes. Are there any plans to get these organizations, international, involved? People must be brought to book for this carnage, surely? Can you hear me? Hussein, have you heard me? Hussein? Hussein?
Yes, I believe.
Okay. Carry on.
Yeah, correct. I agree with you. Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you very clearly. I can hear you. Khalid, I can hear you. Carry on. I was asking whether it isn't overdue to have the ICC and Amnesty International and other international organizations involved. The network is a nightmare today. Well, Khalid is coming. Sophie, what's your last word? Eleanor has proposed some major demonstration at the occasion of the G20. What's your view on that, Sophie?
I'm very certain that the President Sulu Hassan won't be at the G20 summit, because when you look at how it operates, it's going to be member states, members of the G20, the EU, the AU, and clearly the chairperson Angola, the president of Angola, and the commissioner. And then they are going to perhaps invite the chairpersons of the regions, the regional organization, like who's chairing ECOWAS, who's chairing East Africa, who's chairing SADC. And therefore, I don't think she is coming. But I think she's correct to say that civil society can put pressure on their governments to do something. And therefore, those proposals would be perhaps, like she indicated, not to recognize the elections. And many have already done it diplomatically by not being there, by not issuing statements. And I still maintain the fact that SADC and the AU reports are so scathing. These organizations must now convene and say what is the way forward. And lobbying can be done if there's a special sitting of SADC to look at Tanzania. I'm sure it will include Madagascar, because they are not going to have a special session on Tanzania only. They will include some, diplomatically, but the intention will be how we deal with Tanzania or Madagascar, and therefore those protests maybe, or those messages can be delivered there. I think the AU, it's going to be a bit difficult because it's much bigger, the body, in terms of member states. In February, maybe in January, during the summit, something can be done there. But I might have missed the fact that the reports on Zimbabwe were scathing both SADC and AU. But it was complete different time and era, But now you can't hide these things. As in the same way, one of our colleagues have pointed out that with the advent of technology, communication, social media, digital platform, you can't put pressure, you can't hide it. It could have happened during the Zim 20 or 10 or 15 years ago. At that time, we didn't even have WhatsApp, we didn't even have space, we didn't even have a virtual platform to mobilize. You relied on the traditional media. And at times, traditional media can't do everything, or they can't, some of them are scared because some are state-owned. But this time around, people can talk. So I'm saying that's the only option, because us, the ordinary people in these countries, we don't have the military might, we don't have so I'm trying to say,
But we have SABC and Sophie Mkwena.
yeah, but I'm saying
SABC
has been running the story. SABC has been carrying the story.
Yeah, but you got the news. You got new information today. 3,000 to 5,000 people killed.
It's not the first time. It's not new. It's not new. That number has been there since weekend. Some are even quoting more. I'm saying the story is covered every evening. Every evening, the story is carried. But SABC is not a government. SABC is not a military. Doesn't have.
No, I was talking about the media, Sophie. I was talking about the media, the role of the media.
The media is reporting, and the media is reporting. But the problem is, it's not. It can be a deterrent, or it can put pressure, but to what extent? Because there's so many, as Eleanor has pointed out, there's so many issues in different countries, and to cover everything. For example, this commission in South Africa, the whole time it's about.
Yeah, no, I'm talking about Tanzania now, Sophie. I'm just asking and appealing to you. I know you're no longer at SABC, but you have connections there. We would want some of the information which emerged out of this meeting, including the numbers, but also the recommendation which I put to Eleanor and Hussein, that it's time to get the ICC involved. You know, there's been a massacre.
Yeah, the process of ICC can't be media. It has to be done by structures. Remember, the ICC, the ICC handles individual cases with sufficient evidence. I'm saying you have to put a.
Come on, what are you talking about? What 5,000 people killed, and as Hussein said, the head of state must take a responsibility. She must go before the ICC. Anyway, thanks, Sophie. Thank you very much. Sishua, your last words on this matter, including recommendations. You did touch on some of them. For example, the idea that we tighten the electoral laws, including the SADC protocols on elections, and the AU wants these must become standard in every country. And secondly, an audit of the pre-election process, after which it must be determined whether the election should go ahead or not. I'm saying this because you have your election next is it next year?
That's right. In August 2026.
Yes, there's someone in the region who's having elections in January. Which country is that? Yeah, I think we need, carry on, Sishwa. Your last word.
I think in terms of recommendations, we need to find a way of sanctioning countries that do not promote good governance on the standards that are established by SADC and the African Union. Because if you don't do that, autocrats, both aspirational and established, know that they can get away with it. There'll be consequences, there'll be protests after a week or two, things calm down, and they go about their lives as if nothing has happened. So I think the critical point going forward is really to think about what do we do between elections, at the regional level, at the continental level, there's a lot of data that is generated by people in these countries, by civil society, by academics, about the process that produces the outcome that we saw in Tanzania. But these are institutions, local actors, that is, who lack the resources required to monitor things over a long term. How can we support these kind of actors at the local level to make sure that we involve the regional bodies, the continental bodies, in monitoring the process that leads to elections, rather than simply appearing at the last minute to monitor elections in a day or two and produce the kind of reports. So there has to be investment in the process. There was NEPA at that point, and I don't know what has happened to that body, because it was an attempt to assess ourselves in relation to governance. But it seemed to have happened that this moment that we are witnessing in the region coincides with the death of effective leadership across the region. There was a time when you could have Thabo Mbeki here, you could have Levi Mwanawasa in Zambia, people you could say these are Democrats, for example, you could look up to at the regional level. If you think about the region now, you can't identify a leader who you could say we could run to that leader or we could regard him as a model in the region. Hichilema bent his goodwill because he came on that ticket. But look at what happened. He's the first one, he's the only leader, in the region, apart from maybe the Mozambican one, who turned up there to support the sham of the election that happened. So it's almost like a global wave of terrible leadership, not just at the regional level, Trump at the international level. The combination of both local and international factors has produced an environment where we are left as a population that we are left vulnerable to say, where do we run to for models, for examples? The reports that are generated by the AU and SADC observer missions are very good, but there seems to be a mismatch between the observation teams and the bodies that send them to these countries, for example, because these are critical reports. You saw the Zimbabwe report, you saw the Tanzania report from both AU and SADC. But when they are taken back to the heads of states to say, what do you do? What can you do something about it? Nothing happens. Why? Because there are no Democrats in the region. If you take the woman in Tanzania, I often, in fact, forget her name. I think the more common one is Madam Dictator. If you take Madam Dictator, for example, to say who, even if she goes to the regional heads of states meeting, who can really talk to her there to say what you are doing is unacceptable? You can't have Mnangagwa talking to her like that, because he doesn't have the moral legitimacy given what he's doing to the opposition and civil society in Zimbabwe. Hichilema, who could have done that, if one doesn't know what Hichilema himself is doing in Zambia, which is not different from what Madam Dikita was doing, Hichilema could have done that, actually was there to brace the coronation. So he lost that legitimacy. Then you go to Mozambique, the Mozambican president was there also taking part in that. It's only South Africa maybe that can actually push it for a much stronger position on this issue. But one can't.
What about us? What about us?
So much.
Can't we do something here? Perhaps draft something which becomes intervention at both AU and SADC. That civic society hereby, we can use the SAPIS dialogue forum to do that, but I think we need to say something on the occasion of this tragedy.
I think civil society has to establish greater collaboration mechanisms with these institutional bodies, SADC and AU, in relation to what happens within the election, because civil society is well placed to read it. They know what happens in these countries, what they lack, and I said, are the resources that require this kind of long-term monitoring. So if we could find a way to strengthen local actors, that is civil society, academics, in relation to monitoring properly the process of governance that happens in elections, I think that's one way. Failure to do that, in my view, we risk having a stage where we have to prepare for more violence, for waves of violent protest in the region, and the response to elections that are regarded as not credible. What happened in Tanzania is not different from what happened in Mozambique not a long time ago. And we know what happened in Zimbabwe. So it seems to be the case that people may begin to thinking we have to prepare for violence rather than preparing for elections. because whatever has happened in Tanzania in terms of the violent protest, I am quite convinced that things will never be the same there because of this moment. Sometimes countries need this moment of reference to say we don't want to go back there. And I think for Tanzania, the last few days provide that moment, because even if Madam Dictator going forward will be very embarrassed by what has happened. When she travels outside Tanzania, people have seen the sham of the election she won. She'll be very embarrassed by that, because dictators, aspirational and established, they hate exposure. And I think it's true what my colleagues earlier said when we said we need to identify and shame some of these individual leaders. We need to do that, intensify these efforts to name them as individual leaders, so that there's a cost to associating oneself with a dictatorship or supporting those who are dictators. The other point I think is that the danger of what is happening now is that it opens room for coup attempts, for military rule, for example, especially given what's happening in Burkina Faso. People begin to thinking maybe democracy has failed. Maybe we should start having trust in soldiers. If you look at Afrobarometer reports or surveys, for example, the trust in the military is not as low as it was maybe 5 years or a decade ago. People are increasingly beginning to think our leaders have failed, but democracy has failed. But it's not democracy that has failed. It's the leaders who have given democracy a bad name. And I think that the key danger here going forward is that we risk regression, a scenario where a region such as Southern Africa that has been free of military, rule for a very long time, unlike West Africa, risk is getting into an episode where the army increasingly is beginning to be regarded as an alternative option in terms of the democratic system. But finally, I think that the fundamental point is really about getting the people in these countries to understand that ultimately change will be brought by them. We can bring the ICC. People talked about the ICC. You see, Africans are very, very. They have an ambiguous relationship with the ICC. They see that this imperial Western institution that targets African institutions, and so if the SADC and the AU as our bodies fail to manage some of these issues, the danger is what I mentioned earlier, where violence becomes the only response that is available to people. And so it's in our collective interest as SADC, at the AU, to make sure that we prevent what has happened in Tanzania by identifying the root causes, to say, how do we get there? And that requires a historical approach to say this moment was not produced last weekend or a week or so before the election. It was a consequence of a long, drawn-out historical process that brought us here. The arrest of opposition leaders, the abduction that we saw in Tanzania, the absence of institutions, independent institutions such as Electoral Commission, for example, the restriction on political parties.
Well, you have a sharp pen.
It's a shame that we don't have a Tanzanian on this show. Why? Because our colleagues are afraid. We're talking to some of them. They are key to speak, but they're...
Yeah, we didn't bring Tanzanians on this because we were well advised. Even those who are based in London were not able to participate because their families were being hounded. So we were very careful about that. In planning this, yeah. So, but you have a sharp pen. If you can put something on paper on this.
But those are the restrictions that.
Yes. But
those are the restrictions that we have to sort out, because it's an indictment on the region, on Tanzania's leadership, that we have a discussion on Tanzania. There are many competent and qualified Tanzanians who are qualified to speak on these matters, but they are afraid. Madam Dictator can't lead Tanzania for the next 4 or 5 years from a barrack. She'll have to come out and face her people. You can't be a president who is afraid of her people. That speaks to the illegitimate nature of her leadership. And she has to come out and make concessions, apologize for what has happened, make sure that a fresh election, if need be, is conducted. Otherwise, I do worry that going forward, people should prepare for violence across the region.
Thanks, Joshua. Thanks very much. Thank you very much. Khalid, karibu bwana. My last question, what's the way forward? First, beginning with the immediate.
Yes.
People must pay the price for this death of our people. There must be a price to be paid. And Samir must
Correct.
face the music, right? How shall we proceed, Hussein?
Very true. And I support you and the sentiments you have made here that we cannot allow such atrocities to be committed and then just, ignore and not ensure justice is done. We owe it to those who have died. Their deaths are not in vain. And that we must hold not just Samia, but the entire CCM government and the senior police officers who ordered the shootings and killings in Dar es Salaam, in Arusha, in Mbeya, in Songwe. They must all be held to account. As civil society in Kenya, we have already petitioned the ICC to intervene. We are already working with Amnesty International. We are already working with Human Rights Watch. If you look at their social media platforms, we've asked them to comment, to post, so that, as the international community comes in, then we can work together to ensure that, those who are in power in Tanzania are held to account. In terms of moving forward, we have made several recommendations. Number one, we want those that have acknowledged Samia to withdraw their acknowledgements. This includes the President of Kenya, Ruto, the President of Uganda, Museveni, the African Commission Chairperson. We are calling on them to withdraw their statements backing up the so-called election of Samia. We are asking the international community to impose travel bans on the government of Tanzania. We want them to be completely secluded, to be isolated by the international community so that they cannot move anywhere in the positions that they're in currently. Thirdly, we are also asking for a repeat election. But before the repeat election, we want a level playing field. So we want a review of the constitution, review of the electoral laws, so that we can have a level playing field and release of all political prisoners, including Tundu Lissu of Chadema, and a fresh election to be held in less than 1 year from today. These are some of the recommendations we are making. As we speak today, we have just finished drafting a statement by African CSOs. It has been signed by over 100 African CSOs to condemn what has happened in Tanzania, to clearly communicate that we do not acknowledge the current government that is purporting to be in charge in Tanzania, and to stand in solidarity with Tanzanians. We are also calling for justice for the victims of these killings. Each and every person who has died, we want them to be recognized as heroes of their countries, not what the government is trying to present them as criminals. These are patriots of Tanzania who have died defending their country, and we must acknowledge them as such. Prof, these are some of the recommendations we are making, and we are hoping that in the next few days, few weeks, if not days, that we will see action taken against those who are responsible for the carnage that we have witnessed in Tanzania.
No, Asante Sana, you were saying. I just want to say before I carry on that we want a SAPS trust to be party to that resolution by the CSOs. So we should discuss tomorrow how we can append our support to this, and I believe your recommendations are very solid, and they really constitute a fitting conclusion to this discussion. I would just ask Seshua, who has a very sharp pen, to capture this and perhaps have a statement from us as the panelists on this to make public our position and endorsing, as we do hereby, what Hussein Khalid has said, and also to thank him. It was quite a job to get him, and I apologize for the technology, but as you know, we have been working with Tunga and others, and his recommendation to have you was well measured. He told us you do a good job, and you have done as well here. Especially the conclusions and the recommendations, which we hereby endorse. You should be relieved to know that we have over 100 people on this platform, and on YouTube, you will be able to see this on YouTube tomorrow. And our figures run into the 9,000-10,000 people across Africa and in the diaspora. So thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you.
Eleanor, Sishua, Sophie, and Sishua, please, if you can help us put something together, maybe a page, that would really help. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Africa, oh, di panda. Boye, kaina pana mawa na kokate.